be a sponge, and then bring the juice.
By focusing on your improvement, by focusing on your progress, and eliminating any fixed mindset that you may have and acts of perfectionism, then you encourage your own mastery.
On some level, we do what we want to do 24 hours a day. Now, sometimes it may not seem like that, but if I'm choosing to work instead of sleep, what I'm actually saying is keeping my job is more important than sleeping.
I'm tired of this. I'm tired of getting beat. What can I do to get over this hump? So mentally, that's when I kind of put that forefront, like, hey, it's either all or nothing.
I like to put failure in quotations because I don't believe that failure is true failure if you're looking at it with the right mindset.
The truth is, the journey to greatness is hard. It takes time, it takes effort, it takes focus, and every day you have to decide what you value, what you want to pursue, and what you want to achieve. And if you dig deep enough, if you push hard enough, we all have what it takes to be great. Welcome to the Edge of Greatness. Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Edge of Greatness podcast. I'm your host, Charles Schultz, and today I have with me a very special guest, retired military vet, former bodybuilder and powerlifter, and now an Ironman athlete, Boyd Myers. Boyd, thank you so much for taking time to join me today. It's an honor to have you on.
Man, it's an honor to be here. Thank you so much for the invite.
Absolutely. So I saw recently you had a birthday. Happy birthday.
Sir. Yeah.
How is it that you like spending your birthdays these days?
Well, anytime I can, I want to spend time. I have a very tiny little girl. To be as old as I am, I'm 46, and I have a 3-year-old. It's kind of regenerating. So I spent a little bit of the day with her. I just relaxed. I worked out first thing in the morning. I mean, that's working out and training. If I go on vacation, that's the way I spend those two. So I got to work out and then close the day out. I went and watched the new Batman movie. Just a nice rest and recharge day. So.
Do you enjoy the Batman movie?
Man, I was pleasantly surprised. I was more worried about him being a vampire versus a bat, but man, I think he killed it. Yeah, it was a great,
nice.
It was a really good movie.
Awesome. So I want to start off with something that I think that's going to resonate with you. I love your story. I think that you have some really incredible things to offer my listeners, but what I want to know is when you hear someone say, I can't do that, how does that make you feel?
Well, I mean, I say it all the time. If you believe you can't, or you believe you can, you're absolutely right. I mean, that's as simple as it gets. I feel like a lot of people have a lot of limiting beliefs on what they can accomplish. And man, I look back at my life and I realize, I mean, there's some of the things I've been able to accomplish. I realized, man, what have I left on the table just because I didn't know what I could do or I didn't believe what I could do? So that self-belief internal, having that internally, it can be developed. I mean, I don't think it's a superpower that, anyone's necessarily born with. But we're capable of so much more than we know. And that's where it starts.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think that that's one of the interesting things about your journey is that you have overcome some of these obstacles. And I think that's the testament to how we find excellence is our ability to deal with adversity. So what I want to know is from the get-go here, let's start with your journey from being overweight to becoming an Ironman.
Yeah. So back up a little bit on that. So man, I was in the Air Force, and I was interested in fitness very early. I started training other people. So at first I was just kind of average, and I'm going to date myself here, go way back. I did the first Body for Life challenge, and it was funny. A lot of guys in my office, we all signed up together, and we put money on it, right? And I mean, it was a small amount because we were all young enlisted guys in the military. I mean, it may have been $50 if I'm not mistaken. About 6 weeks into it, they tapped out and they all gave me their money, right? So I drastically changed. And from that point, I went and got my first personal training certification, and I started working with others. That was kind of my side hustle before everybody on Twitter, had 14 jobs, right? And 14 grinds. I was training people while I was in the military. Loved doing it. My goal was to get out of the military and open a gym. But as you don't make a ton of money in the military. And I had a baby, and So when I looked at like, hey, how can I do this? I didn't have a ton saved up and money. So when I got out, fortunately / unfortunately, we were in the middle of a war. And I decided to go to Baghdad for a year to take a contract job. So just find a way. I mean, and that's kind of what I do. I just commit and figured out. I got out of the military before I knew I was going to Iraq, right? Went to Baghdad. When I left, my son, who's now 17, was just a couple of months old. So I missed my son's first steps and first words, with the goal of, hey, I got to sacrifice something now to make something great later. Went and made a lot of money, ended up spending, upwards of 2 years there without a day off, without coming home. But it gave me, what we need. I came home, I opened my gym. Fast forward to 2013, a lot of stuff had changed in my life. A lot of, and I just kind of got burned out of doing that. And just one day decided to move my family from San Antonio at that time to Dallas, Fort Worth. And when I left my gym, man, I left it. I left all the health habits and everything. I don't think, from 2013 till 2018, I don't think I ate a healthy meal at all. Right. The healthiest thing I may have eaten was chicken McNuggets or something like that. Right. Moved up to Dallas, Fort Worth, got into sales, bounced around, did a couple other things, but in 2016, I got into real estate, and it just exploded, right? I was right place at the right time. It was a great company. I made more money than, the only other way was if the Dallas Cowboys signed me, or I started moving heroin. And I didn't want to go to prison, and I quite wasn't in shape to play for the Cowboys, right? So that was, so I made a lot of money. With that came 80-hour work weeks, came, a lot of stress. Those jobs, the commensurate stress levels are usually pretty, are comparable. So, man, the money was there, but I was dying inside. I wasn't available. When I was home, I was not home. I was thinking about work. I was stressed. I was drinking. It amazes me how much I was drinking. I'd knock down a full fifth of Tito's on handle, like in one setting. It was crazy. I'd sit down and play video games and drink a 30 pack, and then go get more. Right. So it was bad, man. And and that's a vicious cycle. I continued to just gain weight, and I didn't feel like doing anything. So I was hungover all the time. I was miserable. I was a shitty father, a shitty husband. And I realized, like, man, I'm in a downward spiral. So I was about 3 weeks before my daughter was born, Father's Day. I didn't feel well. Something wasn't right. I didn't say anything because we had a very high risk pregnancy. But I went to work and I started talking to a guy. And of course I got on WebMD, which is the worst thing to do when you don't feel well. Right. And convinced myself, man, I'm having a heart attack. I'm dying. So I left work and went to the hospital. It was a Sunday. And real estate, that's when people buy houses, Saturday and Sundays, right? So went to the hospital. They rush you. You go in and say, hey, I think I'm having a heart attack. If you don't want to wait in line, that's the way to get in. I don't advise it though, right? So they rushed me back. They did, started testing me, stripped me down, come back pretty quick. Like, you're not having a heart attack, but man, you're getting close. You're pushing it, right? And here I'm thinking, I've got a baby on the way. I like to be around, I was already going to be 60 when she graduates high school. So I was like, I'd like to, man, I've got to really take care of myself. Nothing changed, Charles, nothing. I just can't, for a little bit it did. I think I went for a walk. But then, got back to life, and then, kind of just pulled through it a little bit. And then all of a sudden, December 12th, I remember because I just read the David Goggins book cover to cover. I think it was the day it was released. I decided, hey man, I can do this. I went out to go for a run, and I thought, man, I'm a former military guy. I'm in some sort of shape. Yeah, I had a false sense of what shape I was in. I didn't make it. I say when I tell the story, I ran a quarter of a mile. Man, I think I don't know if I ran 2/10 of a mile. It was bad. And I thought I was dying. I couldn't breathe. My chest hurt. My calves hurt. My legs hurt. My pride hurt. I think I cried, and I walked back, and I thought, man, I've got a long way to go. So, and I know I kind of went off everywhere there.
Oh, yeah, no. In that moment, what changed for you that gave you the strength to deal with the adversity that you were going to face on that journey to losing all the weight and then doing an Ironman?
Yeah. So so going back to that day, an Ironman it was the last of my thoughts, right? So that was December 12th, 2018. I came home and I'm very goal oriented. So, I'm probably borderline OCD, right? Whatever I do, I'm going to be really damn good at it. If that means, going to the casino, by God, I'm going to be the best blackjack player there is, or I'm going to go broke trying, right? If I start drinking, I'm going to outdrink everybody. Well, if I'm in business, same way. I mean, I was obsessed and I was crushing my professional life. So I realized, man, I've got to channel that. How much better could I be if I sober up for a little bit, right? I mean, will I improve? So I signed up for a 5K, right? I'm thinking, okay, there's a Spartan race in Dallas, right, at Cowboy Stadium. I can sign up for that. That gives me 6 months. It was in June, right? And I said, I'll need every minute of that to run this race, this 6 months, right? So I signed up for that. And I thought, you know what? I'm not even sure where I'm going to start because I can't run. Right. I can't really walk. Everything sucked at that point, but I had a Peloton and I thought, you know what, I can pedal. I can sit on that thing and pedal, and I'll pedal slow and I'll just pedal. And then, I know enough about nutrition from my history. Like I've got to straighten up. I've got to, I can't continue what I've been doing. The drinking has to stop now. I mean, because when I drink, I eat like shit. I go to Whataburger. I'm in Texas, right? We go to Whataburger. And then, you wake up the next day and you do it all over again. So, first I just, just one step at a time, just start making a change, start feeling better, it was crazy. The day after that run, as a matter of fact, I woke up the morning after. I woke up at 2 a.m. and I was wide awake. And I said, you know what? I could lay here till 5 or whatever. I'm going to just go get started. And I went on, I sat on a Peloton for 2 hours, right? I mean, I wasn't doing a class. I just sit and watch. I mean, it was dark. And I remember sitting there. And so I think that was probably where the Ironman thing, I was running through my head, like, what can I do? What can I do? I was jacked about this race, and so they started thinking about these obstacles and stuff. And then I had paid for the race. And then 2 days later, I decided, you know what? I think, 5K, that's cool. And, that's a big task for me right now, but I need something a little bigger. And I signed up for the Ironman.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And you have another one coming up now soon too, right?
Yeah, something like that, right? So I'm racing Waco October 15th and 16th. So there's only a few opportunities ever for where they have the full Ironman and a half Ironman in the same town on the same day. I'm doing both. So October 15th, I'm doing a full Ironman. And then on the next morning, Sunday morning, I'm doing a half Ironman.
What's the total mileage on that?
210.9. So you're going to be looking at an Ironman, for people who don't know, an Ironman is a 2.4 mile swim, a 112 mile bike ride, and you finish it with a 26.2 mile marathon run. A half is exactly half those distances. So the combined total for the two races will be 3.6 miles swimming, 168 miles on the bike, and 39.3 miles running.
That's incredible.
Well, I know how I feel after doing one, right? Yeah. So I mean, this one's not about speed and not about, setting records. I mean, I've got to balance it. I need to finish with enough in the tank. And, just get to the swim. If I just get to the swim on Sunday, I like my chances, and then get to the bike. And then that last 13.1 miles is going to be interesting, to say the least.
I always find it interesting when people do things to that level of challenge. What goes through your mind in those moments when you're out there and you're like, man, I chose to be here. This sucks so bad right now. What kind of conversations are going on in your head?
Yeah. You know what? It's really funny. I as far as like big challenges, physical challenges specifically, when I start working towards something, I convince myself in my brain, and this may be pathological, that I've already done it. I mean, I really believe that I've done it, and I had no reason to believe I could do an Ironman. I mean, to back up to that, I hadn't swam a lap in 25 years. I had never been on a road bike. I'd been on a Peloton. That's not a road bike. I never clipped into a bike. I'm sitting right by my tri-bike right here. I hadn't run more than a mile. I want to say 13 years. I mean, it had been a minute. Charles, I hadn't done anything, man. I had lifted a bunch of weights. I mean, and I'd been on an elliptical machine a time or two, right? But I hadn't done anything to believe I could do that. But training for Ironman, I believed that I could do it. I just knew I would do it. So the day I'm doing it, man, I mean, it was so big and it was such a journey for me. There was never any doubt. And even like when that was my first marathon. So, I mean, that 26.2 miles at the end, that's the first time I had ever run over. I mean, I don't know. I mean, maybe I think in training, I ran 18 miles once. But I never had any doubt. And then after I finished, I realized, man, that was the first time. I mean, but I never suffered. Now, in the military, there's a saying, you don't rise to the level of your expectations. You drop to the level of your training. Well, my training, man, I was here in Texas during 100 degrees, and I would go on 120-mile bike rides. So there was nothing that was going to happen in Arizona where I did my first one. There was nothing going to happen there that I hadn't already experienced, right? I would go out, some days I'd go out and just ride, wouldn't even track it, and ride for 10 hours. And it'd be 100 degrees. And I'd go through everything. I'd go through like, man, I'm really dehydrated. I'm starving. But that's what's going to happen at Ironman. And it, surprisingly enough, it never happened. So I had already accomplished it in my mind. So I think that's where it started. I figured it out between the ears first, and the body just had no choice but to follow.
What kind of advice would you give somebody who's wanting to get that first step going, wanting to get in shape, and maybe thinking like the marathon or the half marathon or one of those things is in their future and that's what they want to shoot for? What kind of advice would you give to someone like that?
Yeah, the same advice I'd give anybody wanting to do anything. First off, control what you can control. You got to believe you can do it. You got to believe you're worthy of doing it. And you got to believe that goal is worthy enough for you. Right. I put a lot of positive pressure on myself. I tell people now that can be a double-edged sword, because anytime you start growth, you're going to get a lot of feedback from people, and it may be their own insecurities, right? Telling you, oh, maybe you should look at this, or why on earth would you do that? Right. And so I that goes both ways. I mean, I think you have to just make it all consuming for you. I mean, you almost have to become obsessed with whatever the goal is. Now, that doesn't mean neglect everything else in your life, obviously. But it deserves an intense focus. And just the biggest piece of advice though is commit and then figure it out. Don't sit around, don't become paralyzed by analyzing exactly what you're going to do, waiting for the perfect time, looking for the perfect program. Just start and figure it out as you go. And I think you'll get far enough into the journey to where there's no way you'll turn back.
I love that. You've mentioned a few times now that you have this OCD or all in kind of focus when it comes to things.
Yeah.
And this ability to hyper focus your attention to what you're trying to accomplish. Where do you think something like that stems from for you?
It's practice. I just do, right. I cannot stand leaving things undone. I mean, if I read page 1 of a book, I'm reading the book. I don't care how miserable it is. I don't care how bored I am. It's hard for me to like walk away from a movie. I mean, whatever, right? If I start it, I'm like, man, I'll watch it. And it's just something I practiced. I don't leave things undone. Once I start, I do it. Now, getting started and doing things like that, I do the same thing. Like, today, for example, I knew I needed to ride my bike, and I sat and I stared at my bike, looked at my shoes, looked at my watch, thought, well, I've got to talk to Charles at 11:30 my time. And then I kept putting it off, but eventually, I'm just like everybody else. I'll procrastinate, but eventually you just gotta do it. I mean, like I said, I think the biggest thing is I'm not afraid to ultimately get started. I mean, once you get started, that's the hardest part. I think it's easy to focus once you take that first step.
No, I agree. I think that's the hardest thing is a lot of people don't trust the first step. They're trying to solve all the problems before they make any movement. And then they sit there and they wonder why nothing's changing. And I think that's one of the challenges for a lot of people is getting that momentum going and then seeing what happens and making the adjustments as they go.
Absolutely.
So I saw in one of your posts that I thought was really interesting. You said that we should highlight experiences over stuff. And I find that interesting because I think a lot of people chase stuff. A lot of people chase the fancy cars, the big houses, the raise, the status at work. And I feel like that wisdom only comes with age, but can you expand upon that further for my listeners? What are some of the values of leaning into experiences versus stuff?
Yeah. for someone that, I mean, I grew up with not a lot of stuff. I grew up in Southeast Kentucky, coal mining country. I mean, most of the people in that area are, you know, below the poverty line, that's safe to say. So I didn't have a whole lot, but I didn't know that I didn't have a whole lot. Right. And as I grew, you know, you become exposed to a world that you're, I mean, you can't help almost become materialistic. That's not how I grew up. But then I wanted, you know, Corvettes, Porsches, you know, the big house and all that. Well, fortunately, I obtained the means to get those things. But like I said, it didn't matter what I purchased and it didn't matter what I had, I felt empty inside. And the more I obtained, the more empty I felt. And it was great. It impressed people. People showed up and you got compliments and stuff, but they were artificial. But the best times in my life that I look back on, it has nothing to do with that brand new truck or, you know, the watches or whatever. The things I remember are just the vacations with my family, the spending time, and not even the big elaborate ones. I mean, the most basic stuff, fishing with my daughter, hearing Mike Riley say, Boyd Myers, you're an Ironman. I mean, if I need motivation, I'll put that 14-second video on and I'll watch it. And it, you know, inevitably I break down in tears and I'm like, all right, you know, I can do a lot. So, you know, it's obtaining those experiences. I mean, when you're done on this earth, I mean, you're not taking any of that stuff with you. Right. You know, so, that's what I with my children, I'm like, hey, let me expose them to so many different things and you know, and these experiences and let them decide, you know, where their passion lies.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think that that's something that I find myself leaning more towards as I get older, as I build my family, as my kids grow, is the experience side of things. And I'm less focused on the monetary stuff and the cool things and that
Sure.
sort of thing. But I find that to be very powerful. Another interesting thing is you mentioned growing up in Kentucky. What was it like for you as a young man, as a young child?
Yeah, I like I said, I didn't know we were doing without, but looking back, we obviously were. I remember at one point I applied for like you know, college, like student loans. I mean, thankfully now I didn't get them, right? Because I know that's a trap, right? But I remember it was funny because they said we made too much money. My family did. And I was like, well, wait a minute, hold on a minute. Is this real? I mean, where's this money going? Because I'm not seeing any of it, right? But you know, so it was a great place to grow up in some aspect. Because I mean, there were so many things that we weren't thankfully exposed to. You know, I mean, I really didn't have to worry about getting gunned down or, you know, robbed or anything. However, I grew up. My father was extremely emotionally and physically abusive. I mean, yeah, and you know, I mean, either a lot of times they'll say like a dad can be an example or a warning, right? Well, for me, it wasn't a warning who I was going to become. It was an example of who I wasn't going to become. I mean, he was an addict. He was angry. He had his own demons. You know, I had to, you know, forgive him for that and let that go. But I remember counting the days down till I could leave. Right. I knew that if I went to school that, you know, the chance of me ending up back in that little area was pretty great. You know, I mean, just from the financial standpoint, the commitment to college, I had no experience. I was 18. So they weren't beating my door down to, you know, come play sports. So I knew the military was my one way out. Right. And so I did that. I got out and I'm extremely thankful for where I grew up, and I still have strong relationships with a lot of people there. But you know, the home life, my father made that like, hey, I got to get out of here. Now, thankfully, the rest of my family was absolutely amazing. My mother worked multiple jobs. I think that's where I get a lot of my work ethic from. She worked at gas stations, ice cream shops, restaurants, you name it. She did it to make sure we never did without. And my grandparents, I mean, my grandfather, I mean, he was definitely the father figure of my life. And I mean, just taught me absolutely everything about just kindness and spirituality and, you know, what it is to take care of your family and be a man.
So what I want to know is, when you look back at your time when you were starting to go down the wrong path, did you ever feel like maybe you were starting to become like your father?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, so, and being able to reflect on that now, I mean, does the son, does he repeat the sins of his father? Absolutely. I found myself getting shorter with my kid, with my son. My daughter was still a baby. And I don't think I've ever even told her no if she asked for anything. She's got me wrapped. Yeah, I felt I mean, that's the biggest part. I felt my relationship suffering, and and I could, you do it in your mind, you start thinking, well, this is different. He didn't have these kind of responsibilities, and he didn't have this kind of stress and this news. But looking back, absolutely, I definitely look back and I was like, man, I was angry. I was miserable to be around. I don't, I mean, thankfully, I have any friends and relationships remaining at all after that. But yeah, I mean, and bury it. And that was a big part. I had to let that go. I had to forgive that man, because if I did not, I was going to be stuck in that cycle forever.
I think that's an important piece to mention, is the forgiveness piece, because we're all human. We all struggle. We all have difficult times. And I think a lot of people, if they go to visit your website and they go to visit your page, they're going to look at where you're at now, and they're going to think that you don't face challenges anymore, that you're past that point. But as someone like myself who understands that pursuing excellence is a daily process, it's a learning thing, it's evolving, and you have to navigate those things. What are some of the challenges that you continue to face today that make you better?
Yeah. I mean, fatherhood, that's a whole different thing in itself, right? I've got to be mindful. I've got to be the example for two children, a teenager and a small girl. And I mean, right now, I mean, dude, my truck, I drive a diesel, I mean, so you start thinking everything is so expensive. And like I said, I mean, I worry about my family. I think about my, what's the future going to be like for my children? My mother's on Social Security, I mean, how on earth does she survive that? And I mean, it's, the same stuff that everyone faces. I want to retire. I don't want to work forever. I want to go out and do stuff. Right. I mean, I'm like, some of that, those things may be delayed. So just everybody, we all have stuff. Right. So, it's just, keeping things in perspective. And again, I can focus, the control model. I focus on what I can control. Stuff I can't control, as much as I want to, and as much as I'd love to, you got to sometimes you just got to let that stuff go. And all I can focus on is my, how much, how hard I work and how I respond to things that happen to me.
Have you always had that mindset of control what you can control, or is that something that you've developed over time?
Man, no, I'm the opposite of that, right? I wanted to control people. I wanted to influence the way people thought. The weather would piss me off, man. Like, training, this is ruined, what was me? I'd get pissed off in traffic. No, that is definitely something I've learned as I've gotten older. Maybe, finally I obtained some of my grandfather's wisdom, but no, I that is not who I was for a great part of my life.
What are some of the tools that you've used to learn how to handle that better?
Well, I mean, so I'm a big proponent of journaling, right? I empty out every single day, right? I wake up and it's crazy. I wake up with all these ideas. And first off, I want to remember some of it, right? Because, an hour later you forget exactly. I had this great idea and I forgot. I should have wrote it down. So I get that out. It calms my, and that has a calming effect as well, because now I've got it on paper and I can think throughout the day. Like, as new stuff comes, I'm like, okay, yeah, I can absorb that. I'm not still stuck on, what I need to do is with that garage and whatever. Right. But also meditation and breathing, man, it's amazing how, if you take a second, calmly breathe, and that's a big topic right now. A lot of books have come out on it recently. It's amazing the effect it has on everything. And it's almost magic how these huge problems quickly they just end up in perspective. And it's just, I mean, because I think we have a recency bias. Anything that happens to us right now, this text that just came in, I'm sure it's a big work thing, and I'm sure the world's on fire. But it's gonna be okay. I mean, bullets aren't flying, right? So I don't think anyone's dying at work, right? So, I think just keeping things in perspective. I think that's, that's a couple of things. That's a couple of the things I do to, help me do that.
Right. You mentioned something interesting there in your answer, talking about how people are so gravitated towards answering their phone and thinking that the immediacy of now is the text we're getting is so important that we have to answer it right now. And someone like you doesn't have that luxury because you're training for hours at a time. How has unplugging from the world helped your mindset when it comes to handling problems and overcoming adversity?
Oh, it's the greatest thing in the world, especially as people that need to contact me understand. I mean, it's great. If I don't answer a text, they'll assume right now, oh, he's out running. You know, I was probably the last person I knew to buy a cell phone because I said, I was still in the military. I said, they're going to, you know, I don't want them feeling like they have me on a leash, right? People are like, no, you know, it's just great. Listen, I was 100% okay with getting home and checking my messages. Like, oh man, that was important, right? So I will, and I think I'm weird here. I'll go out, I'll go grocery shopping, or I'll run errands without my phone. And it's and it's crazy. There's power in that, being able to turn it off, put it away and not look at it. Right. I mean, I see children, I see 2 and 3 year old kids that have an iPhone and that's beating on it at restaurants and stuff like that. And they're doing a great job in getting to the apps they want to be to. But you know, I like when I'm sitting at dinner with friends or with family or whatever, I want to see their faces. I don't want to see the backs. I don't want to see that Apple symbol on the back of their phone.
Oh yeah, no, I totally agree. I think that we lose a lot of our communication and conversations and some of those connections because we're always trying to stay connected through a phone. Sure. Like we think we're more connected, but in actuality, we don't even know who's sitting next to us, who's watching us do things and everything else in between. We just find ourselves in this world where it's just passing us by. So, what I want to do next is I'm curious, what does it mean to eat the frog?
Eat the frog. So that's a saying from a book. I think Brian Tracy wrote it, that if you've got something pending, you've got something big that you're facing, that you're dreading, eat the frog. If you eat the frog first thing in the morning, everything you do for the rest of the day is going to kind of pale in comparison to that, right? So I'm huge on scheduling. Mine's actually downstairs right now, but I have every 30-minute block of my day figured out every single day. Right now, sometimes things happen and that's moved around. But I make it a priority to do the big stuff early, get it out of the way. I cannot have anything hanging over my head throughout the day knowing, yeah, I've got to make a bad news call or I've got to turn something in. I just believe in knocking it out. So that's what Eat the Frog is to me, is doing the big stuff, doing the worst stuff first and just getting it out of your way, getting it off your plate.
I love that. I've had a conversation with somebody in the past who said something similar, is that when you're planning your day, plan the hardest thing first. And then as the day goes on, you have time to fit in smaller things that maybe don't carry as much weight. And so I think that that's an awesome thing. And eat the frog. I like that. It's a different kind of way of looking at it. So
absolutely.
Shoot, I lost my train of thought there for a second. Oh yeah, there we go. That's what I was thinking. Okay. I'm curious here. With all of the different things that you've done, bodybuilding, the military, powerlifting, Ironmans, when you look at your life and you look at what you've accomplished and you look at your performances, what would you consider your performance superpower?
I'm fairly relentless. And so whatever my superpower is, I mean, what I would determine is what I'm currently doing. Right. I have the ability to look back and think I made it through that. You know, I mean, I thought the world was falling apart. You know, if I go out and I run, so let me tell you this. So I right after Ironman, a few months I hadn't run a whole lot. I was, maybe 4, 5, 6 miles at a time. And I decided, I saw a statistic about 22 veterans a day commit suicide. And I was like, man, that's crazy. Somebody needs to bring awareness to this, right? So I decided people were doing 22 push-ups a day at that point. You may have seen that going around on social media. Well, I decided, and it was dead center of summer and I had barely been running. I was sitting at about 223, 224 pounds, right? So I decided, hey, I need to go out and run 50K. I think that's a good idea to bring awareness. And I had never run 50K, but I was doing it. I decided this on a Wednesday or Thursday, and I was going to do it Sunday. And I ended up getting stuck at work. I didn't get out of, I was like, okay, let me beat the heat, right? So I need to start this by like 3 a.m. so I can get most of it done before the sun comes up. Well, I didn't get out of work until like 11 that night. So I slept like 3 hours, got up, and just in my mind, I was going out and I was running this 50K. I was surprised at how easy the first 13 to 20 miles were. I was like, man, this is good. I think I'll run further than that. There's a reason they call it ultra once it goes over the marathon, because that first step after 26.2 miles, and that was only my second marathon at that point, right? The first step, I thought, oh my God, I don't know what's going on. This is a world I've never been in. And there's no crew, there's no cheering, there's no support. It's me. And I'm in my neighborhood and I'm dying. So I look back on that right there and I'm thinking, man, I had scarlet fever when I was a child, right? I mean, I thought I was going to die there. When I lost everything, man, I was sitting on my in-laws. I mean, they're well-to-do. I was sitting at their home and my car got repoed. That was shitty. Okay. So I'm out here running by choice and it hurts. And I'm talking to things that don't exist. I'm in pain. My feet are on fire. I might black out any second, but I mean, this is my choice. And, I'm blessed to be able to be at this point. Right. So suffered through, made it. I mean, but I was just, to answer your question, my superpower is I can reach back and I can remember everything I've gone through. I've got these crazy memories of the bad times and the good times and the successes. And I use them as strength.
I think that's such a valuable tool, is the ability to look back and reflect. I feel like a lot of people don't realize how far they've come because they don't spend time appreciating where they started.
Sure.
Tell me about what you do when it comes to coaching people to appreciate where their feet are.
Yeah. I mean, so anybody I coach, I mean, I get invasive. We get deep into the weeds, man. I want to know everything. I want to know about their spectacular wins and their spectacular failures, right? What they've crashed and burned. I want to know the hardest thing they've ever gone through in their life. I mean, and the hardest thing is that you've ever gone through is the hardest thing, right? Some people, surviving COVID was the hardest thing they've ever gone through. I know plenty of guys that spent a lot of time in Afghanistan and Iraq, and I tell you, they didn't, COVID really didn't bother them a whole lot, I don't think, right? So you definitely want to know, perspective is everything. You want to know what they're facing, what they're going through, but you also want to remind them you made it through that. You did it. You're on the other side. There's so much, suffering is suffering. My son, if I take that Xbox away from him, he's going to suffer, right? But there's beauty on the other side of that suffering, right? So I think it's important to be able to go back and look at everything you've accomplished and everything you've made it through. And that's how you've realized, man, you know what? It didn't kill me. I did make it and I will make it. Right.
Yeah. I do think it's interesting how perspective makes or breaks what we're thinking in each moment. And like you said, your son losing his Xbox would be the end of the world. Worst thing ever. And, you look at it back, if you go forward 20 years and he looks back on that moment where you took his Xbox away, he's going to be like, why was I upset? I don't even know why was I screaming in that moment? But it's funny how we are so present in whatever's happening to us now that it's the worst thing ever.
Sure.
Being able to look back and go, man, I can make it through this. I can do that. I look what I've already done. So yeah. I think that's really important. I think that's really interesting. Tell me I want to go back to when you were at that low point. I want to jump around a little bit here, but I want to go back to tell me about overcoming depression.
Yeah. So I'm obviously not clinically certified on this, but I can say this. I mean, it's vicious. It's real. Okay. Anyone else that probably up until that point, somebody, they'd have said they're depressed, and I would have probably thought they were just, that was an excuse not to do something, right? Or but I think especially for guys, right? I think we're expected to have the answers and to be strong. I mean, it took me a while to seek help on it. I mean, and by help meaning to admitting that, hey, I think I've got a problem, right? You get stuck in this horrible, this never ending cycle. and it's tough to get out and, and to have that light shone on it. And to really, the first thing is saying, hey, I think I've got a problem. I think I'm depressed. And then, then you can start exploring, okay, now how do I get out of this? Right. And what's causing it? I mean, that's a big part of it. What's leading me into this? What vices are causing me to, to constantly, stumble and fall? But I mean, the first step for me was, just acknowledging like, yeah, man, maybe I am depressed. And it's funny, people that know me, and I'm sedated now, right? I mean, typically I'm all wound up and wired up and going a million miles a minute. So for the people that saw me day to day in my life, they thought Boyd never has a bad day. But man, they didn't see when I came home, and it was just like everything I felt like the weight of the world was on me all the time. So yeah, for me, just admitting that, yeah, man, maybe there's an issue, that was a huge load off my shoulders.
Yeah, I think that's such an important topic in today's world, because we look at it from what we see on social media, what we see in a small bubble, what we see when we're looking at the highlight reel version of what people are living in. Yeah. We all have demons we're facing. We all have battles that we're going against. And I think that a lot of times, even people who appear to be invincible have challenges that they have to take on and they have to face.
Yeah, that's huge, because, and that's one thing. And with my son, I've mentioned to him, and I mentioned to people that I coach, like, remember, first off, you're only competing against you. You're competing against the person you were yesterday, the improvement upon that. Remember anything you see on social media, because we're not the most authentic we've ever been in the world, Charles. I don't know if you realize that, right? And there's a lot of value in authenticity. And it's, you have to constantly keep in perspective that whatever you see on social media, that's a highlight, right? You're seeing that person's, highlights. You're not seeing, in most cases, you're not seeing their like absolute lows. You're not seeing what they went through. That's why now everyone's an overnight sensation, right? You don't see the hell they go through to get to where they're at. So I think, keep in perspective that everyone has stuff they're not talking about, they're going through and they're struggling with, fears, concerns. That, I think that's important to understand that.
Yeah. It's funny that you mentioned the highlight reel and the overnight success, because I was talking to somebody the other day about when I record something prior to the conversation to set up whatever I'm doing, or if I'm doing a solo session, if somebody were to listen in and watch, like be a bug on the wall when I was doing those, you would see probably 45 to 50 takes where I would stop halfway through and go, that was complete shit, Charles. What the hell are you talking about? And like, turn it off, just be pissed. And like, it takes me 7 times longer to do a solo session where I'm trying to talk than it does to have a conversation with somebody. But all they see is the highlight reel version, the final copy. And I think that's an interesting piece.
Yeah. I mean, and understand too, that if you see a picture on Facebook, that was probably one of like 42 that were taken, right? So that was the one that they liked the most.
Yeah, for sure. So what I want to know now is, with all that you've accomplished to this point, you've done the bodybuilding, you've done the powerlifting, the Ironman, you're planning to do another Ironman, you've did the 50K. What keeps you motivated to go more? What keeps you going?
Yeah. So, it's funny. I've got a habit of committing to something that, like, right after, right. That's one thing I'm working on getting better is, like, I want to make sure I have purpose in this case. Right. This is something I really want to do, and I'm doing it for the right reasons. I'm not a medal chaser. I don't go do every little triathlon that comes. I don't, run every race. And hats off to people that do it. If that's what motivates you, then great. That's just not me. So, I mean, I'll admit, I was already committed to Ironman Cozumel last year, and I got COVID. I mean, I got fairly ill enough to where I wasn't, and I was like, I don't know how travel's going to be and this and this. So I honestly, I don't think I was completely committed to it. I mean, looking back, I was like, yeah, it probably all worked out pretty well, right? Because I was like, I really don't want to go to Mexico. I don't know how getting back into the country is going to be. We just didn't know, right? So I deferred it to this year. So I was like, okay, yeah, same thing. I was like, do I really want to do it? Do I care? And I was like, okay, I think I can do a 10.5-hour Ironman. I'm 40. I was 45. I'll be 46. That'll be pretty cool. Because I'm not a natural. I'm not a born triathlete by any stretch. So I decided, so that motivated me for a while, until I probably realized, yeah, I can do that. That's not that. So all of a sudden, 9 months, 10 months out, or hell, I guess a year out, I was like, I think I can do that probably right now. So I needed something bigger. And that's when the idea to do the 1.5 back-to-back days. I'm a member of the Ironman Foundation. And when I reached out to them and said, hey, is this an Ironman Foundation race? It's the fundraising group of the Ironman. It's like the charitable organization. They brought up, hey, you're a veteran. How would you like to participate in the Gold Star Initiative? I was, which is you're acknowledging a Gold Star family, someone that's lost a family member, in service to the country. What that means is I would be holding the flag during the national anthem, which is a huge honor. You give the flag back, and they give it back to you before the run, and you carry the flag during the marathon portion of the race. After you carry the flag, the entire 26.2 or 13.1 miles, in my case, and 13.1 miles. And then you give it to a Gold Star family member after you've finished it. And it's a big deal. And you participate with that family. So when I saw that, I was like, man, I don't like carrying a water bottle when I run, but hell yes, I'll do it. Let me do it. So it became something that was bigger than me, right? I was more than honored. I didn't even know how to go about becoming the Gold Star Initiative representative. Fortunately, they offered it to me. But yeah, it was fine. Finding that thing that makes it worth the time, having a reason to do it, not my reasons. I like seeing how far I can go, seeing what I can do. But ideally, for the first one, that was about me. That was about saving my life, right? But now, there's I like to find things that are bigger than me. Hence the 22 suicide a day run that I did that almost ended in my own demise. I mean, unfortunately, and then everything I've done since then has had a purpose behind it.
I love that. I think that's an awesome story. I'm looking forward to seeing how the run turns out for you, and the 210 plus miles. That's going to be quite the incredible adventure for you.
Yeah, I ran the other day. I ran with an industrial broom handle.
Trying to get ready.
I mean, I ran with that, and it was heavier than whatever. I don't care what the weight of the thing is. I know after 6 miles, I was like, man, I think I was carrying it like this, I mean, It's not going to work with the American flag. So I've got, it's fun. Now I've got a whole new way and a whole new thing to focus on the train. So
that is,
yeah. But I listen, if that thing hits the ground, that means I'm under it. Right. Cause I mean, there's no way. I mean, I just, I will die on that course. And, listen, I've got a family that has a family member that paid the ultimate price waiting for me at the end. So I promise you, I will figure it out on both races.
I love that. Boyd, if some of my listeners want to reach out to you or follow you in your journey and see what you're doing next, where's the best way for them to connect with you and see what you're doing?
Well, I'm the busiest on Twitter, and that's my name, Boyd Myers, at Boyd Myers, BoydMyers. My blog's the same, boydmyers.com. You can go there, and you'll see all the different ways to contact me. I respond to everybody, no matter how many messages I get. If someone thinks enough of me or my journey and they comment, I do a little more than like it. I always genuinely thank them and welcome them to my crazy life.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Boyd, it's been an absolute pleasure talking with you. I'm really excited to continue to watch your journey. I think it's going to be a lot of fun to see what you do with this upcoming Waco run, bike, swim fiasco that you're planning. But thank you so much for taking time to join me today.
My pleasure, Charles. Take care, buddy.
Absolutely. As always, guys, keep reaching for the stars. Fall flat on your face, but remember, whenever we fall, always get up. Thank you for joining us today on the Edge of Greatness podcast. If you haven't yet, please take a minute now to subscribe and review our show. Join us again next week as we continue to dig deeper into the key components of greatness. The path to greatness is never linear, so remember to keep pursuing greatness no matter what. Keep stretching your abilities, reach for the stars, and fall flat on your face. But remember, no matter what happens, whenever we fall, always get up. Until next time, I'm Charles Schultz, and this was the Edge of Greatness podcast.